Hello, hello. Welcome back to another section of Three More Words by Ashley Rhodes Corder. Apologies for this one coming a bit late. We're getting into the swing of things for Christmas. I've got my earrings and Joyeux Noël, so things are kind of crazy busy, and if you celebrate, maybe you can relate. But anyway, we're gonna start with another section, the second section of this read here. Hope you enjoyed the first section, and if you are just joining us for the first time, I'm Julie. I read books over here, so that is what we have in store. Today we are starting on chapter 3 on page 29, if you are in a paperback copy such as this one. And we're going to get through at least 2 chapters and a little bit into chapter 5, I believe. So that is what we've got going today. Let's get started. Page 29, chapter 3, Family Matters. Biology is the least of what makes someone a mother. And that's a quote from Oprah Winfrey. Once Lorraine knew I was in college, she started to text me on a regular basis. Seeing her name on my screen flooded me with conflicting emotions. Sometimes I gave quick responses, sometimes I ignored her. The Corder said I should make peace with my past and integrate all facets of my life, and that you cannot have too many people who love you. Even so, I didn't want to cross it. Also, I knew enough to worry that I could get ensnared in the spidery web of drama that spun around Lorraine. At the end of October, my freshman year, Lorraine called 3 times, leaving messages to phone her back. The 4th time, she caught me rushing to class, and I answered without looking first at the name on the screen. "Hey, it's me," Lorraine said. "We're having a Halloween carnival at church, and it would mean so much to Autumn if you could make it." Scarlett was holding the door for me, but I waved her to go ahead. "I want you to meet Rex." Lorraine paused, then added, "He's the one who got me into this church. And sober." "Okay," I said, surprising myself. I was curious to see my sister again. Besides, maybe I needed to form a relationship with Autumn in case Lorraine crashed. I wasn't comfortable going alone. I asked my roommate, Iris. "I need the weekend to finish my paper on Japanese pottery," she said. "Maybe Aiden will go." Aiden was majoring in political science, and he made even the most boring topics sound interesting. He had a wonderful smile and hair a bit more strawberry than mine. "We gingers have to stick together," was his pickup line. You couldn't call it dating, since there were few planned meetups. We were just together a lot. It felt wrong to even suggest the trip to him. Nikki would have been the best. She knew my life story, but she was working full-time and going to community college in Citrus County. Most weekends she stayed in St. Pete with Ian, and I didn't want to drag her away from him. That left Eric. He didn't seem surprised by my call and responded enthusiastically. "I just need to tell my dad I'll help him with the roofing work on Sunday instead of Saturday." When Iris heard that I'd called him, she snapped. "You rarely even take his calls, so how can you ask him to be your emotional airbag?" "We're still friends. We help each other out," I said, as much to convince myself as her. Iris looked at me challengingly. "Does he think of you the same way?" I shrugged. How could I explain our bond when I was so conflicted? I compared every guy I met to him and somehow expected that Eric would always be there if nothing else worked out. I knew this reflected poorly on me, so all I said was, "Either way, Eric has excellent intuition. He'll help me figure out if she's drinking and how her kid is doing." People in stable families have no understanding of chaotic ones. The stronger members feel compelled to protect the weaker ones. Sometimes children parent the siblings or even take charge of their parents to keep them out of trouble and prevent the family from being split up by authorities. Nobody from an upper-middle-class, intact family could imagine the terror of never knowing whether you will live under the same roof as the rest of your family the next day. I had done an abysmal job with my brother Luke, who was never out of trouble. I wanted to protect Autumn, who had already lived with Lorraine 2 years more than I had, from the same fate, even though I hardly knew her. "So, what's the deal?" Eric asked as he drove my car toward the Sunshine Skyway Bridge. It was one of those clear October days when Florida is the sapphire jewel on the Earth's ring. Behind us, St. Pete's cluster of office towers and the dome from Tropicana Field baseball stadium formed a sculptural background as we headed higher and higher onto the causeway. The Gulf's glassy surface was too bright to look at without sunglasses. "Just don't leave me alone with Lorraine, okay?" I said, cracking the car window and taking some deep breaths of salty air. I have a tendency to get motion sick, and my anxiety caused a sour taste in the back of my throat. "What are you so worried about?" I swallowed hard to suck down the bile. "You don't know how she can be." I was relieved to see that we were turning into a nice neighborhood. Rex's house was freshly painted a sunny yellow. The open garage door revealed several Harleys in various stages of repair. "Cool," Eric said. Autumn was almost 6 and already in costume. She ran out the kitchen door that led into the garage. "Ashley's here!" she shouted as Lorraine followed behind. "Wow," I said. "Which princess are you?" "She's Aurora from Sleeping Beauty," Lorraine answered for her. "This is my friend Eric," I said formally. He stepped closer to shake Lorraine's hand. "I'm a hugger." She reached around him for a squeeze, but I backed away. "We need to head over to the church in about 20 minutes. Did you bring costumes?" "I did," I said. Eric had lent me an Elvis costume he'd worn for a Halloween party the year before, which came with a black wig. I added gold chains and large sunglasses. Lorraine looked to Eric, who shrugged. He hadn't brought anything. "How about one of Rex's motorcycle outfits?" Lorraine showed him how to pull the studded motorcycle chaps over his jeans. "Hottie," she giggled, making me wonder if she was trying to flirt with him. "We can't all fit in my truck. You want to follow me?" The fair was bigger than I expected, with many booths and crafts for sale, including Bible covers and Christmas items. There was a biblical petting zoo, pony rides, freshly squeezed lemonade, and tables filled with homemade baked goods. Lorraine bought a stack of tickets so Autumn could try the games. Eric helped her throw balls for prizes, while Lorraine and I lingered in the background. Out of the blue, Lorraine said, "I would have gone to college if I hadn't had you." She squinted into the distance. "At least I finished high school, even though I was pregnant. A real diploma, not a GED. Eric stepped forward. "Is it okay if Autumn has her face painted?" "Do you have enough tickets?" Lorraine asked. "Yep." She waved to a friend. Everyone was so excited to hear that my firstborn was coming. No one can believe I have a daughter old enough for college. I shifted uncomfortably, wondering how she described her relationship with me. Was I the taken away by the cruel state who refused to give her a helping hand daughter, or the one she lost because of her illegal and irresponsible actions? Well, maybe some higher being forgave all if she was saved, but that didn't mean I had to absolve her as well. She watched Eric lead Autumn by the hand. "I like your guy. He's very handsome. Does Gay like Eric?" I bristled. She doesn't really know him. "What did Gay say about you coming to spend the weekend with me?" "I don't tell Gay everything I do." "Did Sammy let you know that I'm divorcing Autumn's father?" I shook my head. "He was a bad influence. Now I'm clean, and so is Rex. He's been sober for 10 years this Thanksgiving." I nodded. "You've been happy with those people, right?" She probed. I recognized her jealous tone. Envy is one of my flaws, too. In the car on the way back to the house, I said to Eric, "Let's come up with an excuse to go back tonight." "Okay." Eric agreed, but we couldn't come up with a plan, and Eric is a terrible liar. Then Rex offered to take him on one of his fanciest motorcycles. We were staying. After Eric's ride, Lorraine said, "Hope you like lasagna." I saw one defrosting on the counter. I make mine with low-fat ricotta, and nobody can tell the difference. I'm very particular about food. It was like I hadn't grown out of that picky food stage that toddlers go through. I still disliked combination foods, even if the individual parts like cheese, noodles, and tomato sauce were fine, but I didn't say anything. Oh, let's see. This is Ashley. Now, it really would have been rude to leave since she already had prepped dinner. I picked at the noodles while Autumn gobbled hers messily, then put her head down on the table. You finished? Lorraine asked in a sharp tone. Autumn startled. Get ready for bed and don't slop up the bathroom. Want me to help? I asked Autumn. As I waited for her to put on her nightgown and brush her teeth, I was imagining my counselor at the children's home supervising my bedtime routine. I fall asleep in Mommy's bed, then she moves me. The smell of the perfume in the master bedroom was cloying. Tomato sauce rose in my esophagus, burning my throat. I had no memory of my mother ever tucking me in. Night, I said, and backed away from the bed. Night-night kiss? I blew one from the door. I had a better time than expected, Eric said as we drove back. I insisted on leaving before breakfast, blaming a ton of homework, which was true. Really, I found most of what Lorraine said irritating. She pretended everything between us was normal, when it was bizarre. Eric stopped and bought bagels to eat in the car. Lorraine seemed to like me. Yeah, maybe too much, I said, then laughed. Eric paused for a few seconds, then said, She is more accepting than Phil or Gay. I glanced at him, suddenly tense. Why do you say that? They want you to date guys who are going to be doctors or engineers or .com millionaires, he said. Your mother didn't ask me a single question about school or jobs or even where I lived. At the quarters, it's like the Spanish Inquisition. It's not that she didn't ask about your future, she didn't care. Because she only thinks of herself. If you listened, she was all me, me, me. She had no interest in my courses or my friends either. That was just an ornament for her to show off. That's harsh. I felt a river of lava rushing through my veins. She may look like Mother of the Year to my sister, but she was never there for me. I exploded. She left us in foster care because she'd rather hang out with drug dealers or worse. How hard would it have been to get a job in an apartment and take a free parenting class? Why couldn't she stay off the streets and out of jail when she had 2 kids who needed her? Okay. He lifted both hands from the steering wheel in surrender. But you have to admit, she's trying to do better for Autumn, and she's reaching out to you. It's way too late for that, I seethed. Eric opened his mouth to respond, but ended the discussion. You can't understand it, because you didn't live it. A few weeks later, Lorraine called again. Hey, she began, as if I heard from her all the time. Can you come for Thanksgiving? My brother Sammy will be in town. I had first met my uncle and his family when I had attended a drama camp at Duke University and visited them on the way home. I liked them so much I invited them to my high school graduation, but I wasn't about to miss the quarters feast and traditions. Thanksgiving is a major deal at our house. Autumn keeps asking for you. I'll get back to you. Every few years, my birthday falls on or near Thanksgiving, and we celebrate with cake and gifts while everyone is already gathered for the holiday meal. If I went with Lorraine, this would be the first Thanksgiving away from the quarters, and I would miss seeing the whole family. Impulsively, I dialed Eric. He had called several times since the trip, but I hadn't replied to his messages. Iris even asked me why I was avoiding him, and I told her to tell him that I'd been slammed. But now that I had a decision to make, I wanted his opinion. Was I using him? We had our deal, and I figured I was showing him that I respected his judgment. Okay, so I felt a little guilty because I sensed our feelings for each other were lopsided, but were they really? Maybe he was dating other people too. I had convinced myself that I wasn't taking advantage of him by the time he said hello. Sorry, I have several papers due and I've been studying for exams, I said before telling him about my Thanksgiving dilemma. I feel torn. Eric hesitated before saying, Why are you willing to bend over backward to please Lorraine, who was never there for you when you needed her most? I thought you liked her, I said, surprised. I simply said she wasn't as bad as you made her out to be. When I asked Gay, she made it sound like she didn't care if I went to Lorraine's or not. That does sound like Gay to me, Eric said with a chuckle. She knows that if she pulls you in one direction, you'll run in the other. I laughed. Just because he stood by quietly didn't mean he didn't understand the undercurrents around him. Gay's just trying to support your choices, Eric added. You could compromise. How? I'm not King Solomon's baby. You could have Thanksgiving with my family, he laughed. Just kidding. He lowered his voice. Why don't you do what you want to do, not what you think you should do? Isn't that selfish? Whose birthday is it? Eric's perspective points cleared my head. Perceptive points. I made my excuses to Lorraine, and when Lorraine's inevitable Christmas invite came, I had a ready answer. There was no way I was going to miss decorating our huge tree, hanging with my friends and brothers on Christmas Eve, eating cinnamon rolls and bacon in the morning, having the fun of seeing everyone open the gifts I'd sweated over, and enjoying my haul of perfectly picked and handmade gifts. Eric agreed to come to our house after his family's Christmas lunch. When Blake, Josh, and Phil started playing bluegrass, he picked up an extra guitar and joined in. To my delight, they played harmoniously together. Why don't you play one of your band songs? Phil suggested. Can you plug this thing in? Eric quipped. For the first time, he seemed to fit into our family, and he seemed less tense. I was suffused with warm feelings and began imagining him at the house more and inviting him to events on campus. Then I felt my cell phone vibrate in my pocket and glanced at it. It was a text from Aiden. I flushed as I read, When most I wink, then do mine eyes best see. He had just taken a Shakespeare course. Was that from a sonnet? With Aiden, everything was a game, which was fine, except it left me unsure if he felt as drawn to me as I did to him. When I looked over to where Eric was fixing the capo on the guitar, I adored the way a lock of hair fell over his eyes and his shy, sideway glances. I was never confused about how he felt about me. I realized it wouldn't be fair to get more involved with Eric when I was so attracted to Aiden. Yet, how could I be excited by this simple text when Eric was only a few feet away and he had made the effort to actually be present with me? I'd also been intrigued by other guys during the first few weeks of the fall semester, although most didn't have an iota of Eric's integrity. I tried to take Gay's advice and date the kinds of guys I thought would impress her and Phil, but none of them were as kind, doting, patient, or uncritical as Eric. Was I just too worried about what other people thought? Now, Aiden, I could see myself with him way into the future, possibly moving to DC, each of us working on our own political causes. Like Gavin, Aiden also loved the spotlight. He would be one to run for political office rather than just support a candidate. Eric, on the other hand, preferred to let me shine. I felt warm and safe with Eric, yet I didn't have the same zingy thrill that I'd had every time Gavin touched me. I also didn't have the same churning anxiety as when Aiden was seen someplace and he hadn't invited me along. I didn't try to interpret Eric's double meanings because there were none. Eric's words were simple, and his affection as encompassing as his smile. Cleverness was Aiden's calling card. He loved to leave people, particularly me, wondering exactly what he meant. Being with him was like walking the deck on a ship. You were never sure if you would find firm footing with the next step and had to keep reestablishing balance. That was exciting, but also unnerving, because when I was with Eric, I couldn't shed a nagging feeling, imagined or created, that should be with an altogether different type of person. That I should be with an altogether different type of person. Someone who wasn't just kind and comfortable, someone who was immediately impressive, trying to focus on the long tunnel that led to the future. I wondered whether a life with sure and steady Eric would become boring. That's the end of chapter 3. Page 41, chapter 4, My Brother's Keeper. There is a little boy inside the man who is my brother. Oh, how I hated that little boy. And oh, I love him too. And that's a quote from Anna Quindlen. Some people fall in love almost instantly. The Courters knew they were meant for each other after only 3 days. My brother Josh saw his wife Julia walking toward him across a warehouse, and they made an instant connection. With Eric, My love for him grew like a seed slowly sprouting underground, where I wasn't even conscious of its first tender roots. It was more like the love Gay described to me after the adoption, one that wasn't instantaneous, but would come with shared experiences, both good and bad. Eric was very family-oriented. He and his brother Ian, who were 2 years apart, had grown up as best friends, then bandmates, and finally housemates. He'd never been separated from his brother for any real stretch of time until he was an adult, while I had lived on and off with mine throughout foster care until I was adopted. Most families cannot imagine splitting a brother and sister for a few weeks, let alone for a lifetime. There are even foster care laws against doing it, although there are all sorts of exceptions ranging from bed capacity to how the siblings get along. The first rift came the day our mother was arrested, when I was 3 and he was an infant. Luke and I were placed together 6 times and separated 7. There were reasons for each change, but you don't have to be a psychologist to know any child would be wounded by having the bond between brother and sister so regularly disrupted. Luke, being younger, needed me far more than I did him. He clung to me the way Harlow's infant monkeys held on to fake wire monkey mothers in his attachment experiments. I felt an obligation to protect my brother from callous foster parents, from bullies, and from his own reckless ways. Our worst time together had been at the Moss home. There he received the most sadistic punishments. Mrs. Moss slopped hot sauce down his throat and held him underwater in the bath, letting him breathe at the last second in her version of waterboarding. By the time Luke was 7, he was deeply disturbed and needed the therapeutic environment the children's home provided. Our guardian at Lytton, Mary Miller, insisted we be reunited there with the goal of being adopted together. However, families who wanted me were unwilling to take my brother. While the adoption counselors had approved of the quarters for me, my parents did not feel they had the energy or skills to take on Luke. Then, a younger couple who lived in the same county became interested in Luke, and both families agreed to facilitate our relationship. I was relieved that he could have a connection without worrying that he would ensnare me in his troubles. Unfortunately, Luke was viciously mean to his pre-adoptive mother. When he tortured her miniature poodle, they realized they weren't equipped to raise him. After Luke moved back to the children's home, the quarters insisted we visit him at least once a month. "Do we have to?" I complained. "He is so lonely for you," Gay said. "But he's always clinging and jumping on me. When I lived at the cottage, he bit my arm and it bled." My feelings about Luke were like foul-tasting soup. The basic broth was my love and deep affection, but every time I saw him, he added some rotten ingredient that repelled me. "Luke hungers for someone to nurture him like a mother, but that's not your job," Gay said. "Don't feel guilty. You're not the one who let him down." 5 years after my adoption, and after Luke had lived in Florida's foster care system for 14 of his 15 years, I learned that someone wanted to adopt Luke. Ed Kemper had served in the military and taught handicapped children. Both seemed ideal training for Luke. By then, I was driving and made the routine monthly visits, now to Ed's, on my own. Luke was more obnoxious and more physical than ever. He pretended to playfully poke, punch, and squeeze me, but his jabs hurt. He was not a little kid anymore. "Maybe I shouldn't continue to visit so much," I said to Ed privately. "It's a long trip, and I have a tough schedule at school this year." "That's fine with me," Ed said. "We need more father-son bonding time." Luke had a trust fund from our lawsuits against the Moss family and the state of Florida. While my passage through foster care had been horrible, his had been far worse, and he received a much larger settlement that could help pay for his special needs, especially to continue his psychological counseling. Ed enrolled Luke in a horseback riding program that proved to be therapeutic. He showed off his ribbons for jumping and loved taking care of the big, majestic horses. "I'm getting my own horse, just like the king," Luke announced when I visited after he came back from a summer birthday trip to England with Ed, where Luke turned 17. England has a queen, I corrected. I can't wait to see you ride. The first time I went to the stables, Luke was wearing the traditional jodhpurs and riding cap. Sitting up straight in the saddle, he looked like he had been born to an aristocratic family in a grand home. "Watch this," he called from the ring. He trotted to an outer circle, spurred his horse, and easily made it over a jump. I clapped enthusiastically as he patted the horse's neck. "My trustee said I can buy a horse," Luke said. "He has to keep his grades up," Ed added. When I left the stables to go home that day, Luke was too busy in the ring to even wave goodbye. For the first time since I had been adopted, I didn't feel as though I was abandoning him. The summer after my sophomore year, I was headed to England for an extension of a Shakespeare class that I had taken that semester. Eric joined me in Scotland after my course, and he turned out to be the perfect travel companion. We were gone for almost a month and never became annoyed with each other, even under stressful circumstances when we were hungry, soaking wet, lost, or exhausted. When we returned, I was to start work at a Tampa television station for the rest of the summer. Eric and Ian had just moved into a small 3-bedroom house only 10 minutes away from my job, along with Ian's puppy. Eric suggested I move in with them. We had gotten along so well on our trip, I'd agreed to try it until it was time to go back to the dorm. My relationship with Luke had dwindled to visits on his birthday in July and at Christmas, but it included random phone calls and texts from him, almost always complaining about Ed's unfair rules, being dumped by a girl, or hating school. On the 4th of July, Eric and Ian were busy, so Nikki and I drove up to Crystal River to be with our families. I tried to get Ian to come up later for the fireworks, but apparently the Smith family picnic is some big deal tradition, Nikki said. I didn't contradict her, although Eric had said something about going out with the band members that evening. I wasn't worried about Eric, but Ian had a more flirtatious nature. Nikki began humming along to a rock song about romance on the radio. "Ashley, are you in love with Eric?" "Good question. I can't really tell," I said honestly. "How can you be so cold? Eric is so good to you." "I'm not sure I'll ever be able to love a guy the way you love Ian. Sometimes I think that the whole foster care thing damaged some crucial love circuit. I'll probably never get married." "Never say never," Nikki said. Nikki and I had invited some of our friends to come to my house to swim in the pool, eat barbecue, and climb onto our roof to watch the display being blasted from the fireworks barges. The last of my guests left at midnight, and I was on my way to my room when my phone rang. It was another of Luke's late-night calls. I decided to ignore it. In a few seconds, it rang again. "Why do you always call so?" I started to say, answering. Luke was screaming. "I'm gonna kill myself if you get any closer! No! Stop it! Don't hit me! No!" I rushed downstairs. Phil was brushing his teeth, and Gay was sitting in their bed reading a book. I put the phone on speaker. "Luke, it's me, Ashley. Luke, do you hear me?" "Yeah!" His breath sounded like he was running. "What's happening, Luke?" "Who? He's going to kill me!" "Who?" "Ed and me were fist fighting, and I grabbed a knife to get him to back off." "Where are you?" "Down the street from my house." I heard sirens. "Are there cops?" His next words were covered over by a crunching sound. "Luke, where are you?" "Behind some bushes," he whispered. "I can't live like this. I'm going to slit my throat." "No, Luke, that's crazy talk." I heard a whirring sound. "What's that?" "Wow, a chopper." Phil was standing by me and listening to what could have been the soundtrack for Law and Order. He gestured for me to keep talking. "Luke, listen to me. You know I love you, right? Then why don't you ever visit me?" "I've been busy, but I'm coming for your birthday in a couple of weeks, or I could come sooner if you want." Luke began sobbing. "What happened, Lukey?" "Ed sold my horse. He sold my friggin' horse. I hate his guts." I heard shouting coming closer. "Hold on, Luke. You'll be 18 in 3 weeks. Ed won't be in control any longer. But my horse! Come out of the bushes, son. The voice sounded like it came from a megaphone. Luke, we'll talk about that later, but you've got to do what the cop says. Tears running down my cheeks now. Phil handed me his handkerchief. Gay held up a notepad. She had put his cell phone on speaker. I said, Lukey, put your cell phone on speaker. He didn't respond. Please, Luke, please. No response. I looked helplessly at Gay. She mimicked holding up 2 hands high in the air. Luke, here's what you're going to do. You're going to put your cell phone on speaker and hold it up in the air, okay? I heard Luke panting. Are your hands in the air? Uh-huh. He sounded more frightened. Gay waved another note. Throw the knife away from yourself. Luke, listen, I need you to throw the knife as far away from yourself as possible and away from the cops. I could actually hear the plink as it landed onto the pavement. Phil whispered in my ear. Tell him to sit down with his arms up. Luke, sit down wherever you are and put your hands up. We heard a scuffling sound, then, got him! I started shuddering and my phone slipped from my hand. Phil picked it up and shouted, Whoever is there, may I please speak to an officer? Deputy Baranga, who's this? Came a bass voice on the end of Luke's end of the line. This is her sister's father, Phil said, confusing the deputy further. What's happening to Luke? We're taking him into custody. This is complicated, officer, but Luke is a very troubled former foster child with mental health issues. He needs psychological help. That's not my call, he said, and hung up. Ash, you talked Luke down, Gay said. And probably saved your brother's life, Phil added. Some cops shoot first and ask questions later. A bitter taste rose in my throat as I imagined Luke lying on the pavement covered in blood from a fatal wound. If I hadn't answered my phone, or if Luke had run, or... You can't take responsibility for any of this, Gay said. Besides, he's fine. But it wasn't a bizarre fantasy for me to think of something like that something like that could happen to my brother. Our grandfather, Rhodes, had been shot and survived. His grandfather had killed Luke's paternal great-grandfather. Luke seemed genetically wired to attract trouble and plunge into danger. I looked toward Phil for answers. He went crazy because Ed sold his horse. Why would Ed do that? Ed probably reached the end of his rope, Phil said, because he knew how Luke loved to escalate conflict. What's going to happen to him next? Maybe he'll get the help he needs, Gay said, but at least he's safe. 2 days later, Ed called. Your loser brother is being released from jail tomorrow. He's either going to your house or he'll be out on the street. Ed, I'm staying with some friends for a few more weeks and then I have to get back at college. He can live in your dorm room. That's not possible, I said. He's your son. He's your blood, Ed said. Not mine. For a moment, I considered asking the Quarters to take him on for a few weeks, but then I remembered that they were going on vacation. Besides, the only person Luke listened to was me. I wouldn't ask this if there was any other choice, I said to Eric. Luke will be 18 at the end of the month, and then I can help him get out on his own. What grade is he in? He dropped out, which is why Ed sold the horse. I'll get him back in school and find him a job and keep him busy. My voice became more tentative. Would you do it? For me? No, Eric said. With you. The next morning, Ed's car turned into the semicircular driveway in front of Eric and Ian's house. Ed popped open the trunk. Get your crap out of my back seat, he barked at Luke. As soon as Eric slammed the trunk shut, Ed gunned the motor and drove off. Goodbye, asshole, Luke cursed, then spit, splattering Eric's pumas. He left his bags in the driveway and marched inside. I'm starving. He opened the refrigerator, pulled out the orange juice, and gulped from the carton. "Hey, Lukey, that's disgusting," I said. Don't call me that stupid baby name. Then stop acting like a child." He gulped, belched, and tossed the empty carton, which had been half full, in the sink. "The garbage is over there," I said, indicating the trash can, "and maybe someone else wanted some. So buy more." He opened the refrigerator again. "Where's the beer?" I was seething, but didn't respond. Thinking ahead, Ian had removed all the beer and booze from the house. He even cleaned out some empty bottles from under his bed and found a few swallows of cheap rum, which he poured into a Coke and finished off before kissing the bottle, which, with a real smack of a kiss, goodbye. Most of Luke's laundry was clean or could pass the sniff test, and I placed it in baskets in the third bedroom. Luke seemed content to let me do the arranging. One of my biggest fears, of Luke ending up in jail like his birth father, had come true. I hoped he had learned his lesson and would not do anything worse. The next day, I took Luke to a supermarket to apply for a job. "Show me the money," Luke crowed when he was handed the application. "Keep it down," I hissed. "You work on that while I do some shopping." I brought home pork chops, canned beans, bagged salad, and ranch dressing. "How do you cook your pork chops?" I asked the guys. "Our mom fries them," Ian said. I checked the cabinets only to find the boys were out of oil. "Luke, would you please go buy some vegetable oil?" "Do I have to?" he whined. "You can get it at the convenience store across the street." After half an hour, I began to fret. There were 4 lanes of traffic to cross to get to the store. I opened the front door and looked in the direction of the store. Luke was leaning against the fence of the house, smoking. "Where did you get those?" I yelled. "Where do you think?" "Put that out and come inside." I grabbed the bag. "Where's my change?" "I'll pay you back." "With what?" "Ed gets a ton of money from my lawsuit trust fund and the state. That's the only reason he wanted me. He sold my horse and will keep that money too." "Well, right now, I'm supporting you, and you can't buy cigarettes or anything else illegal on my dime." "Ed lets me drink beer." Maybe he did, and maybe he didn't. With Luke, I never knew what was true. "That's not going to happen here." "That's not going to happen here," he repeated in a mocking tone. For a moment, I actually felt sorry for Ed. All my life, I had wanted my brother to be safe and happy and loved. The truth was that I wasn't always able to be there for him because of the separations, and even when we had been together in foster care, I had to keep pushing him away like a pesky puppy that wouldn't stop jumping or scratching. We were now off to a rocky start because neither of us knew how to negotiate this new dynamic. I didn't want to be an authority figure like Ed, but I also couldn't let him do anything he wanted, especially in a home that wasn't mine. For years, I had been lectured by foster mothers and counselors who told me that I wasn't my brother's mother. It wasn't my job to discipline or care for him, and I needed to know my place and just be his sister. My therapist called my overwhelming feelings of responsibility being parentified. Supposedly, this hindered my development. No matter what I was told, though, I still worried about Luke, whether I was 4 or 14. Finally, with no other volunteers in sight, I had to be his mother again. While we were eating the pork chops, Eric told Luke about some of his own problems in high school. "I hated being ordered around," he said, "and I was terrified to speak up in class. Also, I didn't fit in with the snobs who were headed to college or losers who couldn't wait to just sit around all day." "Yeah," Luke nodded. "Yeah." So I transferred to another school right here in St. Pete where they treated me like an adult. Luke didn't have a smart retort. "I'd like to show you around the place." Eric took him the next day before he could lose interest. When they returned, I asked Luke how he liked it, but he merely shrugged. A few days later, the grocery store called and said Luke had the job. He was to report the next morning. "The hell I will," he said. "I don't need to work. I'm rich." Late the next evening, 2 guys wearing ragged hoodies who I'd never met knocked on the door, and Luke answered it. "Hey, man," he said, and started to invite them in. "I don't think so," I said with my arms outstretched to bar the door. "Sorry, guys, my sister can be a real bitch." "That's it," I said to Eric when we were alone. "He invites creeps to the house in the middle of the night, and then he calls me names." "Here's the part I don't understand," Eric said. "Your brother went into foster care when he was less than a year old. I thought people lined up to adopt babies." "They kept giving our mother chances to get us back." Eric thought about that. "Poor kid," he finally said. "I can hang in there if you can." 2 days before Luke's 18th birthday, Ed Kemper called. "How's my son?" He sounded ablaze with loving kindness. "Okay," I said warily. "Do you want to talk to him?" "No, just tell him I'll be there later to bring him home. We need to be together for his big birthday." Ed was crying. "He'll always be my son." The next day, Luke disappeared with Ed as fast as he had arrived. Cleaning out Luke's room, I found 2 mysterious pills that Ian thought might be ecstasy, rolling papers, and an empty bottle of Jägermeister. I felt as if I had been slapped in the face. What if a deputy had come for him, searched Eric's house, and found the drugs? It wasn't fair to have put any of us in jeopardy. I was amazed that Eric had been willing to take in my brother and assume these risks. His generous heart and optimistic outlook were inspiring and made me feel closer to him than ever. He didn't look down on me for having such a complicated family, and he could see the best in even Luke, even if my brother was determined to be his own worst enemy. We had weathered this together. At the same time, my childhood dream of being the perfect big sister was shattered. Luke still had his golden hair and cute crooked smile, but he was wrestling demons that were far too powerful for me. Knowing this freed me from responsibility, but I would never regret trying. If I hadn't, I would have always wondered if I could have diverted his destructive course. That's the end of chapter 4. Do a little bit of chapter 5, page 55, Get Out of Jail Card. Children begin by loving their parents. As they grow older, they judge them. Sometimes they forgive them. That's a quote from Oscar Wilde. After those crazy weeks with my brother, I was relieved for school to start. As a theater major, I was in many plays on campus. I invited both Lorraine and the Quarters to see me on separate nights, acting in our class's version of Alice in Wonderland with Alice as a psychiatric inmate surrounded by her imaginary acquaintances. The Quarters arrived opening night and sat in the first row. I was the Cheshire Cat, and my scene took place high on the catwalk of the Black Box Theater. "How are you doing?" I said, rolling the R's. At the end of my main scene, I exited the stage by sliding down a pole before scampering off stage. After the performance, Phil said, "I thought you might really break a leg sliding down that pole so fast." Sid joked, "Come back next week for Cheshire Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, with Ashley singing What's New Pussycat." Gay and I groaned. "On that note," Phil said, and waved goodbye. I walked them to their car and thanked them for coming so far. "Wouldn't have missed seeing my little kitty cat," Phil said so kindly my eyes watered. The next evening, Lorraine and Rex roared up on separate Harleys. They wore black leather jackets and German-style motorcycle helmets. They took seats in the last row and leaned against the back wall. When I made my entrance, Rex whistled, but Lorraine kept him quiet for the rest of the performance. I left the dressing room with my makeup still on to say goodbye. "I didn't get it," Rex said. Lorraine shot him a warning glance. "But I loved that pole trick." "Glad we came," Lorraine said. "Who were they?" the director asked when I returned. "My mom and her boyfriend." "Weren't your parents here last night?" the girl playing Alice asked. "Yes, but..." Sid filled in. "Ashley's family is complicated." I gave him a grateful smile. to say the least. The Quarters wanted to have an elegant dinner the night before my college graduation. I think we should invite the Hecklers, Gay said. Lou Heckler was my speech mentor, and the Gaffneys, who gave you your first college scholarship when you were still at the children's home. Who else? Eric. I was now living off campus with Nikki and another friend. Ian was always around, and inevitably Eric and I were seeing more and more of each other. His parents have me over so often I'd like to invite them too. Okay, Gay agreed. It's your special night. What about your mother and sister? Not at the dinner at the Vinoy. No, sorry, I was thinking of the actual ceremony and the luncheon after. Why would she want to come? You're the first person in the family to graduate college. Maybe this will help inspire Autumn. Are you sure this is a good idea? Gay shrugged. They'll be in the audience with us, and I'll make it memorable for them. Eckerd College graduations are held in a shaded tent very early in the morning to avoid the cruel May heat. Gay brought three bouquets of flowers. She gave the roses to Lorraine and handed a smaller nosegay to Autumn with a note that read, "You'll get a bigger one on your graduation day." Mine was an enormous bunch of sunflowers, my favorite, interspersed with a riot of yellow and white daisies. Phil took photos of various family groups and then had Lorraine take one of me with Gay and Phil. To an outsider, nothing about the scene would have suggested how odd it really was. At the restaurant, Lorraine and Autumn sat across from Miss Sadness, my primary counselor from the children's home. Her only information about Lorraine had come from my files, and I wondered what she thought about this unusual reunion. Thankfully, lunch went smoothly, and everyone left in good spirits. I returned to my apartment, flung myself on the couch, tossed off my heels, and felt a merciless relief that classes, exams, rituals, and the commingling of people from my past and present was over. Life after graduation was much the same as it had been before, without all the studying. Ian had moved to Pennsylvania with his dog, but not Nikki, who was taking their breakup so badly that Eric preferred not to come to the apartment. Eric and I had agreed to try an exclusive relationship, no more seeing other people, but living apart. Some part of me still wanted freedom, just in case. I became a full-time motivational speaker, which meant traveling for keynotes, seminars, and fundraising appearances. My bookings increased considerably when 3 Little Words was published. And I did several publicity tours and national television appearances, including Good Morning America with Diane Sawyer. I was on the road almost every week and exhausted when I was home. I had volunteered to become a guardian at Lidham or Casa, following in the footsteps of both Gay and Mary Miller, the woman who helped me get released from foster care so I could be adopted. I decided to specialize in teen girls, thinking that they might be more willing to talk to me since I was only a few years older and had been through the system too. One weekend, when I went to Crystal River for Gay's birthday, she handed me a packet of recent mail. I was about to toss a postcard that looked like an advertisement. On one side was the Monopoly get-out-of-jail card. As I tipped it to the trash can, I saw that it was an invitation to Uncle Perry's release from prison party in South Carolina. He had served more than 20 years for second-degree murder. At the age of 5, I had visited him in prison when I lived with Grandpa Rhodes, his father. A few days later, Lorraine called and offered to pay for airfare and a hotel for both Eric and me. At the graduation lunch, she had taken me aside and said, "I'm happy to see Eric is still around." "Do you want to go?" I asked him later that day. "I wouldn't mind meeting more of your family." "I've only been there once before, and it was awkward. Don't forget I have 12 aunts and uncles. I'm used to wild and crazy reunions." "Maybe not like mine. The first thing they showed me was a photo album with the picture of a dead baby brother who I never knew existed. Then they took me to the grave of my brother's grandfather who was murdered by his father over a card game." Eric's eyes widened. "Oh, and that's not all. Lorraine, who wasn't all cozy with her family at that point, heard I was going to be there, and so she started driving up from Florida. On the way, she was arrested for speeding, and Uncle Sammy had to drive 100 miles to bail her out. Are you trying to scare me or talk yourself out of it? A little of both. It's a holiday weekend, and we have a free trip, so why not? He said, but his voice sounded more worried than his words. Okay, I answered, but don't say I didn't warn you about where I really come from. And I think that's where we will stop for today. At the bottom of page 59, just a little bit into chapter 5, there is a page break there. So, good place to stop. Hope that you enjoyed this section. 3 more words, and I will catch you in the next section sometime next week. A little off on the posting schedule, but such is the way things go with the holidays. But Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. Hope that you are having a good time wherever you are, and I'll see you next time. Bye.